At its peak, Ikea was selling nearly 48 billion euros worth of merchandise a year. They had 460 stores across the globe, and they were selling one of those Billy bookcases each and every 5 seconds. Then revenue started shrinking for 3 years in a row recently, and profit in one of those years dropped by 1/3. And they did something crazy. They started closing stores. This video is what's going wrong with Ikea. Oh, and by the way, thanks to Trauma for sponsoring this video. More on them later. You might think at first it's a bad economy or changing tastes. The answer is actually much stranger than you think. By the way, I turn each and every one of these videos into a one-page cheat sheet you can download to go with it. Girdley.com/YouTube. To understand Ikea, you actually have to understand a small part of Sweden called Småland. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. I am definitely not Swedish. Whatever Texas it is, it's the opposite of Swedish. But it's funny, it's a region of Sweden that is reputed to be so thrifty that even the other Swedes make fun of it. There was a young man there back in the day, Ingvar Kamprad, and he got his start as a teenager buying matches in bulk at wholesale and selling to other people in the area. Eventually he moved on, doing the same thing with Christmas decorations and a bunch of different other consumer goods. Eventually in 1943, he registers the name of the company, and it's initials for his farm and his village, and it ends up with Ikea. I'm not going to butcher the Swedish to try to make it work, but you get the idea. Kamprad was actually dyslexic, and so instead of using numbers and letters to name different products that he was carrying, he used words. And at this time he did something kind of revolutionary. He put a catalog of all the goods that he was buying, everything from the Christmas decorations to fish to pencils, and he put them in a catalog. And to deliver the merchandise, he would put the catalog and the goods onto the local milk truck as it made the rounds. One of the very first e-commerce businesses. It wasn't e-commerce because the internet didn't exist then, but you get the idea. And in 1948, he stumbles into something interesting. He adds furniture to the catalog. It outsold furniture did everything. And by 1951, his entire catalog was furniture, and he was sending it out over 200 million copies each year. It was the most published publication on earth, outdoing everything. I guess the Bible too, according to the research. There's a problem with doing mail order furniture back then. Furniture is big, bulky, breaks in transit. It's incredibly difficult to ship. It's often heavy too. Then in the 1950s, an employee named Gils Lundgren, frustrated that he can't fit one of the tables they made into his car for a shoot, unscrews the legs off of it and makes it flat. Often moments like this, when you have to solve a problem right in front of you, that eureka type things happen. And in this moment, they were about to reshape an entire industry. And it would also create for Ikea an unmatched and unassailable flywheel. See, the idea is, if you're somebody like Ikea that builds all your furniture to be flat pack, suddenly that gives you a huge cost advantage and shipping advantage versus everybody else. That cost advantage means you can sell stuff for cheaper, which means you get more customers, which means you get more scale, which means you get more customers because you can lower prices even more, build even bigger stores, and the wheel keeps spinning. And it would start spinning for the next decades. 1958, Kamprad opens up the very first retail store. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the Swedish name, but it starts with an A. And the idea was that you would walk through the showroom upstairs and then grab yourself a flat pack piece of furniture from downstairs, load it in your car, and then build it at home yourself. In this moment, he discovered a lot of the Ikea secret. The actual winding display, the serpentine thing that you go through inside of the store, it's designed to slow you down. So you take a close look at each and everything, maybe putting it in your shopping cart. We've all done it at Ikea. You show up trying to buy a bookcase, but along the way you end up with some candles, a chair, heck, maybe even some meatballs in a little restaurant. One thing to note here was all of this was happening in the 1950s and 60s, when the suburbs were becoming the dominant and most preferred way to live. And the entire Ikea model assumed you had a car and a big house in the suburbs. Well, a house as big as the Europeans make them. Not manly like our Texas houses, you know what I'm saying. Eventually this will come back in the story to bite them. But for now, riding the wave of the suburbs growing into the 50s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s, it was perfect for Ikea. And along the way, as the 60s and 70s happened, something happened to Ikea, which was the existing furniture cartel, the people that were making furniture and the manufacturers in Sweden. They got so threatened by Ikea's total upending of their model with this flat pack furniture that they went and tried to get the company banned. They cut it out of trade fairs. They even pushed their suppliers not to supply Ikea. Kamprad didn't care. He went around those suppliers and started to source stuff from Poland, from behind the Iron Curtain. Remember, the USSR was still a thing back then. It seems kind of crazy today with Russian sanctions going on and the current war in Ukraine and stuff like that. But here was a guy so determined to win that he was like, Yeah, I don't care. I'll buy communist furniture as long as it makes my customers happy. But before we get into that, I want to talk about today's video sponsored Trauma. One mistake a lot of founders make is assuming they own a brand simply because they registered an LLC or bought the domain name. That's not how it works. If your brand isn't trademarked, it can be much harder to protect if someone starts using the same or a confusingly similar name. And simply filing a trademark application doesn't guarantee it'll be approved. That's where Trauma comes in. Before you spend anything, Trauma gives you 4 free trademark checks performed by real trademark lawyers and not just an AI scan. They'll identify identical trademarks, confusingly similar names, and other issues that could create problems before you file. If everything looks good, Trauma handles the registration process in the countries where you want protection. And once your trademark is registered, they continue monitoring social media, online marketplace, and app stores for potential infringement. If someone starts using your brand without permission, their legal team can help you take action. If you're investing years into building a business, protecting the name behind it is one of those things that's much easier to do early rather than after a problem shows up later. Check out Trauma through the link in the description and use code Michael20 to get 20% off trademark registration and monitoring. Funny thing, that all these manufacturers inside of Sweden had tried to kill Ikea. They just handed them an even bigger advantage, because from then on, they would source furniture from, well, anywhere they could get it cheaply. Going around problems rather than through them is a pretty common thing you'll see in incredibly well-run companies. And here was Ikea doing exactly that. And similar to other great companies like Walmart, the founder, Kamprad, of Ikea was known to be incredibly cheap. He was so cheap, not only did he fly economy class when he was going around to their different stores, he was also known to pocket salt and pepper packets, so he didn't have to buy it for his house. Yeah, that's something. Like any good entrepreneur, as he got older in 1976, he wrote a memoir called Testament of a Furniture Dealer and talked about the idea of thrift at a company level and a personal level being one of the greatest virtues you could have. And from that, he wanted Ikea's mission to, well, Ikea to live up to his mission, which was great design and good furniture available for everybody. Remember this, that good furniture and good design, that'll come to bite him later as they get into the 2000s, but hold that thought for now. 1973, they've expanded all the way across the Nordic countries, Copenhagen, Denmark, Sweden. 1985, they became the biggest furniture retailer in Germany. And then the next step, to cross the pond. Part of what helped them do that was some of their early designs became incredibly timeless. In 1979, they created the Billy bookcase, a design that by the 2020s would be selling hundreds of millions of each per year. It's so ubiquitous, the Billy bookcases, as a product that economists now use it to judge relative cost of living in different countries. See you later, Big Mac Index. Oh, if you don't know what that is, economists also use the Big Mac as a way to compare costs of living across different places. So economists are weird. A lot of them, I think, did mushrooms in college. A lot of great entrepreneurs think really well from a first principle standpoint. They're just entirely logical and realistic about the way the world works. And one thing that Kamprad realized was that you can't do great shopping on an empty stomach. And they opened a restaurant inside of each Ikea. Eventually, that would become one of the largest food operations on Earth, selling 1.4 billion meatballs per year across the Ikea empire as of today. Ikea is so big today that they own over 200,000 hectares of forest, and they consume 1% of the world's wood supply. But it turns out they'd also stumbled on something that was incredible about human psychology. Harvard psychologists did a study, and when they had people assemble their own furniture, they found they were 63% more likely to find it of good value than if it showed up fully assembled. So Ikea got to reduce their costs as their model went on into the 80s and 90s by having you and I build the furniture for them. But along the way, they convinced us it was a good idea. That only works if these devices and pieces of furniture are easy to assemble. If you and I get frustrated or we build something poorly, that gets us mad and we start to hate it even more than if it showed up poorly assembled. But here's the deal. This creates a moat for Ikea. As the decades have gone on, they've been able to perfect these designs such that even an idiot like myself can put them together. Talked about Kamprad, the founder, being somebody who thought from first principles. Well, in the 1980s, he started to think about what would happen after he was gone. Multiple sons, and one of the things he didn't want to have happen was for them to squabble and tear the company apart after he would die. The company structure has a combination of different owners, some of which are backed by nonprofit foundations, some of which are getting paid by royalties, not by profit, and a lot of it is getting routed through all kinds of different European countries. Luxembourg is involved. And I guarantee most of you have never been to Luxembourg. This meant that there was no public earnings calls, there were no big fancy shareholders coming from institutions trying to change things, and no family members could tear it apart. Basically because the thing with ownership was so diffuse that nobody could figure out how to do it. It created a two-edged sword for the company. At once, it made it so everybody who was involved would think in decades rather than years. But it had a problem with that. When you think in decades and it's impossible based on your structure to think in years, you're not going to be nimble if things start to go wrong. And that's why in the 1990s, something did go wrong. It emerged in a scandal that Kamprad, during World War II, had been close to pro-Nazi forces inside of Sweden, and especially close to a pro-Nazi dictator during that time. But like a great entrepreneur, he owned it. He said, look, this was one of the greatest mistakes of my life. I'm sorry that it happened, and I deeply regret it. And he wrote a personal apology letter to everybody. Sure, there are different views on the man, and just like everybody else, he's a complicated guy, but people weigh that apology differently. And well, you can figure out what you think about it. This is a story about Ikea, not so much about him and his apology letter. As the 2000s rolled along, the Ikea steamroller was impossible to stop. This was before e-commerce had happened, so you and I couldn't go get a flat pack TV stand or Billy bookshelf off of Amazon yet, and the Ikea train just kept going. By 2010, we catch up where this video started. They have 460 stores, they're doing billions of revenue, and in fact, the entire population count of the United States goes through an Ikea, on average, 3 times a year, 915 million visitors across all their stores. I remember how they had gone to Poland and started to own forests and all that kind of stuff. They owned and were vertically integrated, Ikea was. Their entire supply chain, they controlled it all. But if you remember this whole era of the 2000s, that's when Amazon and e-commerce was coming. Ikea just silently kind of kept from getting involved in the internet much at all. And they just kept publishing their paper catalog. I remember going into Ikea in the 2010s, looking at these huge stacks of paper catalogs that nobody were looking at, and wondering what the heck was going on. Well, this ignoring of the internet would come back to bite them later on, but hold that thought for now. January 27th, 2018, Ingvar Kamprad, the founder of Ikea, finally died at age 91. As you can see from a lot of these old-timey entrepreneurs like him, they were still walking into their stores on a regular basis and making sure the culture was exactly what they wanted. And what Kamprad wanted was frugality, and he kept pushing that through the culture of Ikea during that time. And here's the deal, when folks like that pass away, the company culture that had been so dependent on them, sometimes that changes as well. And as we moved into the 2020s, remember Ikea had ignored e-commerce for much of its life. We started to enter the COVID era pandemic in March 2020. Wayfair and Amazon had spent decades plus perfecting delivery. Ikea still expects you to go into their stores, and in some places it was illegal to enter one. Ikea had started its entire existence as a mail order catalog, and here precisely as they needed to have the internet and e-commerce, they weren't ready for it at all. Meanwhile, Amazon and Wayfair were ready to eat their lunch. The next thing to break in the era of COVID was their supply chain. Remember how I told you it was totally vertically integrated, including owning the forest where a lot of the wood was produced? It turned out to be incredibly fragile when specific parts broke down. Everything from truckers not calling in to warehouse staff not being able to come to work. Then the third thing to happen was in 2022 and 2023, mass inflation hit. And that meant that everything from shipping costs to raw ingredient costs to labor costs were slamming Ikea. And they did the only thing they could: raise prices. You or I going into Ikea year after year would be amazed that the Billy bookshelf would typically have a reduction in price. But here, Ikea was going entirely against that and jacking up prices fast. The good news for Ikea was we were all doing what everybody else was doing during the COVID era: nesting, making our houses a great place to live. Because we couldn't go outside, we couldn't go to bars, and we certainly couldn't go to restaurants. So we made our houses the best we can. This showed in the results. In fiscal year 2023, Ikea hit an all-time high of 47.6 billion euros in revenue, and profits soared. But here's the deal: even as profits went up and revenue went up, volumes were going down. People were shopping at Ikea less. And then the unthinkable happened. As people didn't need to buy furniture anymore, revenue started going down year after year, decreasing from FY24 to FY25 nearly $2 billion a year, or 2 billion euros. But before I tell you about why that happened, check out my hat today. Our sponsor is our conference, Compound Conference. It's a conference where you go if you're the type of entrepreneur who has your fingers in multiple pies and multiple ventures. Come hang out with another group of like-minded folks, some of whom are ahead of you, and you can learn from them. CompoundConference.com. COVID and the inflation is not all to blame for the decline of Ikea. Number one is they've started to get squeezed in the middle. Wayfair, Amazon and the like, they're sourcing from even cheaper suppliers than the ones Ikea can have. So therefore, Ikea is squeezed in the middle. The other thing happening is Gen Z isn't driving like they used to. Many of them, including my kids, don't even want to get driver's licenses. Heck, they don't even want to have cars. In a big house in the suburbs, Gen Z and millennials are feeling like they can't afford them at all. Kia's whole store model is based around the idea of the suburbs being the best place to live. And here are millennials, and even to my extent, Gen X, not interested in living out in the suburbs as much anymore. We want to live in walkable areas. And the younger generation, well, they can't afford the suburbs. Markets like China, as people have moved to e-commerce, the Ikea brand is closing big stores. That's happening here in the US, which is $5.3 billion of their annual revenue. They're starting to close stores. In 2025, it got worse. The US, despite being not a huge chunk of the Ikea business, started a trade war with everybody else, with all kinds of tariffs, which meant suddenly all the cheap products that were mostly imported piece of furniture that Ikea was doing were being hit from all sides. Some 20, 30, 50, or even 100% markup. As you look at this decline and the irrelevance of Ikea, the good news is it's a business that's been generating cash and owning its supply chain and a lot of its real estate for decades. So they're not going to go out of business. It did mean that Ikea was forced to lower prices across 1,500 products, cutting out $2 billion a year, or 2 billion euros a year in profits. I told you at the beginning that at least in one of the years over the past few, Ikea has had its profits cut by a third. Well, some of that's intentional because they're trying to get relevant again. It's interesting, when I was researching this video and I had driven by Ikea, I said to myself, why haven't I been there in a few years? And it's true. Like, if we want a flat pack table or a lot of the stuff that you get out of Ikea, Amazon and the other folks have gotten good enough that we just don't want to go drive and spend an hour and a half wandering through a showroom. The meatballs are delicious, but they're not that delicious. New CEO, his name is Jesper Brodin. He's Swedish, of course, and a name I can actually pronounce. And the reality is, he's smart. He said, my idea is not to reinvent Ikea. It's to make Ikea a better version of itself. With that, e-commerce is now pushing 30% of total revenue for the company, despite being late. They finally woke up and discovered the 2000s. They inherited a lot of structural advantages, all this real estate, a great brand name, vertical supply chain, and some great designs that a lot of us love, like the Billy. There is something they did lose. The moment Comprad, the guy who'd been pointing a finger saying prices need to go down and we need to stay true to our roots, he died in 2018. He's not coming back. And the structure he's created means there's no strong-willed founder at the helm anymore, being able to push people in ways that they maybe don't want to. Ikea is not going to go out of business anytime soon. People still need to buy flat pack furniture, and they sure as heck aren't getting outcompeted by Amazon and folks like that. There's still a big chunk of the market that wants to go to their stores and loves what they make. But there's no doubt that they're struggling. You can see it in revenue decreasing and profits under pressure. One of the magical things about entrepreneurship is what happens when somebody who owns a big chunk in a business is also the person running it and hands-on and making big decisions and pushing it ways that maybe he doesn't want to. I believe it's actually one of the things that makes the entire system in the United States so powerful. We've perfected the entire idea of an owner-operator being all in and having their entire net worth on the line. Comprad for Ikea, whether he knew it or not, took away that magic the moment he set up the entire structure back in the 1970s, and then, well, you saw what happened after he died. And if you're somebody that owns a business, and even if you're there not on an everyday basis, it's your job to make sure that founder mentality doesn't leave the company. Because as you can see from this story, it's critical for it to be part of it. At the same time, you have to make sure that the managers and people that are working inside of your business have the autonomy and the authority to do good decisions. It's a hard balance. In the end, being able to do both of those things at the same time seems to take most people years, if not decades, to learn. And that's part of the fun of being a CEO of a business and owning businesses. All right, that's it for Ikea. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments below. It encourages me to make more. Catch you next time.